Welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Keating. In this podcast, we talk about it all, our parenting, our partnering, and our professional lives, because they are all a part of us, and we were never meant to do this alone. Hello, podcast listeners. We are back with another episode of the Heartful Parent Podcast. And today we're going to do something a little bit different than you've heard me do before. Because normally I bring on experts, in their specific space, and we talk about, what they know. And sometimes you hear from me specifically. But today we're bringing on two guests who are a different kind of expert. Mayna McVey and Berrios are both experts, but not the kind that you might be thinking about. So both Mayna and Mara are parents. I know them through my work as a parent coach and the host of the Heartful Parent Academy. They have earned their expert stripes through an unconditional and maybe not the path they might have chosen. And that is as the moms of kiddos who have rare conditions and special needs. So let me just tell you a little bit more about each of them. Mara Berrios, was born and raised in Puerto Rico. She and her husband moved to Washington State in 2014. And then she became pregnant in 2018 and had their beautiful son, Mateo, in 2019. Mateo is a sweet, funny, strong-willed 4-year-old and manages to keep Mara and her husband on their toes. After the pandemic, she and her husband decided to move closer to Puerto Rico. So they packed up all their stuff and they now live in Texas. And once they arrived in Texas, they were able to find a doctor who gave them a diagnosis that was both welcome because it explained some unexplained behaviors and issues with their son, but also unwelcome because it has led them on a journey that has been incredibly challenging. And that diagnosis was for a syndrome called Bardet-Biedl Syndrome, or BBS, and Mara will tell you more about that. Subsequent to that diagnosis in 2021, they also got a diagnosis in 2022 that their son is on the autism spectrum. Outside of parenting, Mara works as an HR and operations coordinator for a nonprofit. And in her downtime, she likes to watch reality TV and visit her favorite store, Target, or as I like to call it, Target. And she loves to travel. Also joining Mara on the podcast today is Mayna McVey. And Mayna is, as I said, also a parent who has been on a journey with a kiddo with a special diagnosis. So Mayna lives here in the greater Seattle area. And I say here because that's where I live. And her older child at the age of 7 started managing or dealing with some anxiety and impulse control, but they didn't have a definitive diagnosis for that. And then at age 9, after months and months of unresolved leg pain following a car accident, her daughter Cora was diagnosed with an autoinflammatory condition called chronic recurrent multifocal osteomyelitis, or CRMO, or CRMO, where the immune system attacks healthy bones. And it's a long-term condition that Cora may very well not outgrow. Again, I'll let Mayna tell you more about that condition. When not functioning as a parent to Cora and her younger son, Mayna has a business called Closet Fly, which is a wardrobe consulting business. Through that business has empowered hundreds of clients to better express themselves through education, closet edits, and guided shopping trips, which is, so both Mayna and Mara have their own work in addition to the parenting that they're doing. But we're here to talk about their parenting journey and the journey of parenting a child with a rare condition, because both BBS and CRMO are considered rare conditions. although chromo may be more common than we know. And then, of course, Mata is also parenting, a kiddo who, in addition to BBS, has autism spectrum. So we're going to be talking about that today and what that's like. First of all, you're going to learn about these two conditions. And I think it's really important that we give a voice and space to learn about these things because they may be affecting kids that we don't even know. And then I think it's important to sort of, for all of us, whether you're parenting a special needs kiddo or not, to really learn what that's like and what this journey has been like and where Mata and Mayna have found support along the way. So I'm going to leave my introduction there and they will explain much more. Without further ado, Mata Berrios and Mayna McVey. Mata and Mayna, welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I am so grateful to both of you for being willing to be here and share your stories with me and everyone who's listening today.
Thank you for having us.
So I want to jump right in. Obviously I shared in the introduction what brought both of you to the podcast. Mayna, let's start with you and share with us a little bit about your journey as the mom of a kiddo who has some extra needs and, what her diagnosis is and kind of how you got here.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I always like to tell people as a parent, I got diagnosed with ADHD just a couple of years ago. And I know that doesn't seem to make a difference, but it does because it informs how I react to everything. And so my daughter, Cora, when she was 9 years old, she and my husband were in a car accident. They were rear-ended and they both got whiplash. And luckily she was fine, but she hit her ankle on the back of the seat in front of her. And she'd been going to the chiropractor for like 6 months and her whiplash was fine, but her ankle just kept hurting. And it wasn't enough to take any like pain medication or anything, but it was something she complained about every day. And I knew we were doing PT. She was doing PT. She was, doing everything we needed to do, and it wasn't getting better. So at the time, my son he was in the process of getting diagnosed with ADHD too. So we were doing all kinds of appointments in various different ways, right? And that's us healthy, right? Not to mention, last year when my son was sick every 2 weeks, right? But it was a lot. And then, so getting in to see doctors at the time it just took so long. And I'm sure other people listening right now even now they're going through that. But last year, trying to see your kid in to see the pediatrician, sometimes there was a wait even for like sick visits. So when I talked to the chiropractor who we were seeing like every week for PT about her ankle, she had said, well, I said, I know the next step is going to an orthopedic doctor and having them look at her and they're going to want an MRI. I know that's what we're going to need. And she said, well, I can order an MRI. Would you like me to do that? And I said, yes, please. Because then by the time we get the referral and get into the orthopedic doctor, we'll have that MRI in hand. And so that is when everything changed. She got that MRI on her ankle and I was at a play date with my son and I got a phone call from the radiologist saying, hey, I'm just looking at your daughter's scan and it looks like she has a bone infection in her ankle. And I think you should take her to the emergency room right away. And I said, like take her out of school right now and go. And he's like, if it were my kid, yeah. And so that's what we did. We dropped everything and my husband and I packed a bag. And then we have some friends who are nurses and one used to work at Seattle Children's. So she was like, bring some games, bring some food and snacks, right? You're going to be there a while. And that was the start of the journey. And when we got there, the doctors were stumped because all her blood tests didn't show any infection, any signs of an infection. Yet it looked on the MRI like she had a bone infection or a tumor or something. And it was in her tibia. It was actually above her ankle. So we were there for a while, and they were about to put her on 2 days worth of antibiotics through an IV. And that's kind of the standard procedure if you have a bacterial bone infection. And I was nervous right away with antibiotics because I know that if you don't need them, they can really do some damage to your gut. So I was hesitant. And then as we were waiting, I was talking to my nurse friend on the phone, and she was saying, there's this department there it's called CRMO or CRMO. And it's about, it looks like bone infections, but it's not. And you might want to ask them about that. And as I got off the phone with her, the doctors all came in and they said, hey, we all just talked about your case and your daughter's case. And we all think that we need to refer her to a rheumatologist here and wait on the antibiotics because it doesn't line up. And then, so we're like, okay, great. Now it's something that we don't know of. And it was more waiting. But once we finally we had like a virtual meeting with Dr. Zhao, who's head of the CRMO department in Seattle Children's. And he was looking at the MRI with us, and he was saying, this is how I know it's CRMO. Which, by the way, stands for chronic recurrent multifocal osteomyelitis, which is a mouthful.
That is a mouthful.
It's so one of those things that hopefully everyone's going to get really good at saying because they're going to know all about it.
Yes.
And it's the chronic part. It's kind of always there, right? The recurrent means that it can go away and come back. And the multifocal means that it can be in many different bones, oftentimes in the joints, like your arms, your elbows, your shoulders, your knees, your ankles, your pelvis, your spine. And the osteomyelitis is basically like a bone infection. What's different about this is that it's where your immune system attacks healthy bone. So it's an autoinflammatory disease. And when it flares up, then it can feel horribly painful, and it actually is destroying the bone. So for some kids, that's, as this was explained to us from Dr. Zhao, we were like, okay. And in our minds, we were still thinking, this might not be it, right? Like it might be something else. And we weren't convinced yet, right? And he was showing us the scans, and he's saying, if it were cancer, it would have these little ridges. And if it were bacterial, you would see holes here. And he said, this is CRMO. And this is how I know. And because she was all set on getting like a biopsy, a bone biopsy. And we didn't know sometimes that is required. And that's before people knew a lot about this. But now we were just lucky that, one, we got her diagnosed this quickly, because most children who complain about bone pain go to the pediatrician and they say, oh, it's growing pains. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
And right. And what's interesting too is some of the treatment for this is NSAIDs, right? Non-steroid anti-inflammatory meds. And they found that sometimes with high doses of that, a kid could take that for a little while and then be fine. However, sometimes they're not, and you have to have biologics and all these other medications. So at the time, the doctor was saying, this is like June, I believe, of 2022. And Cora had a hard time with running at the cross country meet, and just, it was hurting. And so he was saying, well, the standard thing that we know now is that you have to get a full body MRI, because we don't know where else it is, because it's multifocal, right? And if it's in her spine could collapse and she could be paralyzed. And we're like, oh. And so, and then we're like, okay. So he said, since we don't know that and where it's at, she cannot jump, run, do anything that's high impact until we get that scan. Because If it is in anywhere. So for I think it was about a month, while we waited. There's a lot of waiting in anything right now, I think. And while we waited, her summer was different, a lot different. We didn't go to a roller skating party that she wanted to do because we were freaked out, right? My husband, Jason, and I were just freaked out. And she could swim, right? So we tried to focus on the things she could do. And we didn't realize how much of a practice that would come, like that whole thing, focusing on what they can do, right? In the days ahead. So when she did get her scan, they found some spots on her pelvis, but nothing really major. It was really in that left tibia, and she still has it. However, she was put on anti-inflammatory medication, meloxicam, and she would take that twice a day, and that really kept the pain away for a while. And doc said, "Hey, we won't know until another 5 or 6 months when we do a rescan and see how it's doing." And sometimes it spreads, sometimes it doesn't. But we did get the okay that she could run and jump now because it wasn't in her spine.
I mean, I can't imagine what that would be like with a 9-year-old being told, you can't let them move, right? Which is what 9-year-olds want to naturally do. Mayna, I know there's more to this story, but I'm going to pause you right there for a moment because I want to hear, Mata, you have a son who obviously has a very different diagnosis than what Cora has. And I'd love to give you a moment to share with us a little bit about your journey and kind of what landed you here parenting a kiddo with special needs.
Yeah, my son Mateo, he is 4 years old. We started the journey just right when he was born. He was born with extra toes in both feet. And I remember the doctor saying, like, hey, if there's a tendency in both of your family that somebody is born with extra toes, like, no. So we didn't thought much of it, but it caught us like by surprise. And after that, it was when his feet continued to grow wider instead of longer. We went to a orthopedic doctor, and at that time we were living in Seattle, and she recommended to remove the extra toe because even with what we were having issues, even just finding wider shoes, and it looked that it was going to continue to grow wider. So we decided to do the surgery, and it was in the middle of the pandemic, in October of 2020, just when he just started walking. So he had to be like in a full cast up to his thigh, and just before that he was already having like behavioral issues, not the typical maybe temper tantrums or meltdowns. He was doing head banging. That's when we reached out to you, because we thought there was something else going on, and we also wanted to create our own method of parenting. So with everything going on after the surgery, it was more behavior, more head banging, and I knew there was something else going on, but the doctors kept saying, let's just wait and see. Let's just wait and see. After that, he was diagnosed with a speech delay. So it's like another thing. So it was just things here and there that it kept like mounting up. He had not a seizure, but what they call like spells when he's like zones out. It was after the surgery. So it was just a little bit here, a little bit there. When we decided to move to Texas to be closer to our family in Puerto Rico. When we found the pediatrician here, and he was going through, he had the surgery, speech delay, the seizure. It was like, let's do a genetic test just to see there's something else going on. I know we were very lucky to find a doctor who immediately recommended that, because I know a lot of parents have a really hard time just just looking for a doctor that is okay with them having a genetic testing. So they did a genetic testing, and it was, let's say, it was like 90% positive. They did a genetic testing to the both of us, and we have like the gene mutation that you need basically to confirm. So he was diagnosed with BBS, Bardet-Biedl Syndrome, which is a rare genetic disorder with a high variable of symptoms, which can include retinal degeneration, kidney issues, polydactyl, which is the extra toes or enhanced extra digits on hands and feet, and a lot of things like developmental delays, the behavioral problems, flat white feet, dental issues. So it's just a whole rainbow of symptoms. And there's like 20, I think there's 27 different types. Like, for example, Mateo has BBS1, and I think that's like 27 or something. And each kid can be, like, for example, you can have two kids that have the same BBS1, but the symptoms are not necessarily going to be the same. Maybe this one has kidney issues, but the other doesn't. So, and then with the genetic testing, they decided to also check his kidney, and he has like a small cyst on his kidney. So he was checking all the check boxes. But even after that, I was like, there's something else going on because of his behavioral, the hard time that he had with transitioning to stuff and the changing routine and all of that. So we got a referral, which I can relate, of the waiting list, because it took us, I think, almost a year to get a doctor finally to give us the diagnosis that he's also on the spectrum, which is very common for kids with BBS also to be on the spectrum. So, yeah, that was last year. The BBS diagnosis was 2 years ago. So it definitely has been rough. And I think with both, BBS was because it's rare, so you don't have like any information. It's not like you go on website or online and find a lot of stuff. But then with the autism, it's the total opposite. There's so much information, and it can be so much of kids on the spectrum can have so many different issues or situations that it was a lot, and it still is a lot to take in. And yeah, so it's definitely been a tough journey.
Yeah. I'm guessing that the overwhelming majority of people listening to this have never heard of either chromo or BBS, that this is the first exposure to these two disorders. Is chromo, would we call chromo a disorder or a disease?
Some people say disease or a condition. I think either one is fine.
Okay. So maybe conditions is the right word for both, because I know, Mara, you said that BBS is the result of a genetic mutation. And of course, autism is, as you said, can have so many different ways that it presents. And most people probably have heard of being on the spectrum or being autistic, but we don't always know what that means for each individual child. So I'm grateful to both of you, because I do think it's so important for people listening to know about these disorders for a couple of reasons. One, because you never know if you might have just helped another parent figure out what's going on with their own child, right? Two, because I think it's important to remember for all of us as parents that there are conditions and disorders, syndromes, whatever word you want to use, that are going on in other families. That means their journey as a parent is different. And I hope can bring a little bit of empathy. Like when you see a child, as Mara just described, Mateo is engaged in a lot of head banging and sort of, as a parent, really challenging behaviors for Mara and her husband to manage. instead of seeing a child like that from a place of judgment, or, looking at a child like Cora who isn't going to the roller skating party, or isn't able to whatever, skydive or whatever it might be, instead of being like, oh, that child, doesn't want to engage or doesn't want to do anything, maybe looking and saying, is there something else? Is there another reason for that we can lead with empathy instead of judgment? Which, side note, people, I think that's a good approach in general to other parents, to kids, to the humans around us. As I shared with both of you before we hit record today, obviously I want to bring some awareness to the conditions that both of your kiddos are dealing with, but I also would love to bring some awareness to what it's like to parent a kiddo who has extra special needs, where other parents might not get it, might be judgmental, might, have just all sorts of stories that they're telling themselves about your situation. So Mayna, let's pick up there for you to kind of, I know, I can only imagine what it's like to have your child diagnosed and the fear that brings, but what is it really like when you're parenting a child who has this condition that you've been told by a doctor could result in her spine collapsing, which has got to be a horrifying thing to hear. And then knowing that most people don't even know what it is, right? If you say, oh, my kiddo has cancer, not that that's good. That is not any kind of good, but most of us know what that means.
Right.
My kid has CRMO might be like, oh, so her ankle hurts, right? Which I know it's a much bigger deal than that. So talk to us a little bit about what that journey's been like.
Well, something that's interesting, like on the social media groups, I'm sure, Mata, there's some groups out there for parents dealing with that, right? And I think I've said before, those can be sometimes really helpful and supportive. And then sometimes, depending on where you're at in your journey, it can be really anxiety inducing and not healthy. So I just would say, when you're ready, or go into it with a little bit of intention and like, why am I here? Yeah, right? Like, am I just looking to connect, or do I need answers? Right? Because everybody's journey is different. And even me talking about CRMO with my daughter, there's so many others out there that have it, that have different journeys and similar ones too. But I think that it's a hard one to grasp or accept, because when you're told something about your kid, I think your mind goes to, well, maybe they're wrong, or maybe there's something that they're missing. And so that's kind of what it was like in the beginning, because once Cora started the treatment, which was just like really like NSAIDs, right? It was a heavy duty meloxicam, but she didn't really have very many symptoms with her ankle. And the doctor had said, even when it hurts, if she's okay with the pain, there's no reason why she can't continue doing the activity. It won't make it worse. So that was really helpful to hear. However, when she'd forget to take it, it would hurt again. And then we would get really nervous, like, okay, does this mean it's spreading? Does it mean, and we won't know, right, until we get the other full body MRI in another 5 months or so. And unless something major comes up, which we would just call. However, it just was like living in that time, like, okay, is this real? Like, for a little while, it was like, is this really what she has? Right. And I didn't even, we couldn't even go on to those social media sites, because I didn't want to know how bad it could get. And I feel selfish saying that, but I think a lot of parents maybe have been there, where we couldn't connect with other parents at that time. We weren't ready. Right. Mm-hmm. And then later, Cora got a throat infection, and then she had to be on antibiotics. And to that point, she hadn't had very many side effects from the treatment. So, but once she was on the antibiotics, she had a bad reaction and threw up. And we had to get a different antibiotic. But after that, she had developed these tendencies to be nauseous. And about a month or two later, we were in Chicago, and She didn't want to eat anything that she normally loves to eat. She was nauseous. She was dehydrated because she wasn't drinking, because I later found out that she wasn't drinking because it would make her nauseous. So anytime even she'd swallow. And then we got back here and she was playing soccer and she had a horrible stomach ache. And that was when all of the GI stuff started. So that journey in February of this year it lasted about 7 months or more, well, till now. And she missed about 2.5 months of school altogether, not all at once, but on and off. And it was mainly from side effects from medications, or what we don't really know. We still really don't know. And that's the thing, right? When there's a disease that hasn't been well studied, then you don't have all of that information. And thankfully, we were part of a program where we were signed up for the study so that they could get more data and more information. And all the funding that would come in goes towards the Acquire database, which people all over the world that have CRMO would just put their information in. So at least that everyone could come together and know, okay, it's all in one spot. But once she started having the GI effects, our doctor told us that's very common. And a lot of kids with CRMO can have other conditions like Crohn's disease or psoriasis or all these other issues. And for Cora, she was tested for a lot of stuff, but we kind of think that maybe she had some ulcers in her stomach from probably the antibiotics really messing up her stomach, while the meloxicam was also not doing good things for her stomach. We really don't know, but she had, at one point, we had to go to the ER because she was so dehydrated, just because she could not eat or drink very much, and she lost weight. There were days where she didn't want to get out of bed. And at this time, her CRMO pain got worse. And so part of it too was we stopped the medication that she was on, because we thought, okay, if the medication's doing all of this, we need to stop that first and then let her gut heal. And we were doing this with the guidance of our doctor. But by this time, she had a GI, a nutritionist, a rheumatologist, a physical therapist. I got her into some biofeedback, which was amazingly helpful for dealing with pain. And we did some therapy. I mean, I think I'm missing a couple things here, but she had so many. And I know, Mata, I'm sure, like, there's so many things going on. And what I want to let people know too is that once someone has a condition, especially a child, and there's a lot of working parts to it, sometimes the problems aren't from the disease. Sometimes it's from the side effects of the treatments for the disease, or it's from how the person individually reacts to these things. So it feels, for Cora, we had to really get used to seeing how she was in the morning, and then if she could get out of bed or not. My husband he was great, because even if she didn't feel good, his goal was to get her to go outside. And if she could do that, great. And because the pain in her ankle started to get worse, because she was off the medication, but still had the GI issues, there were days where she couldn't walk on it. And she was on crutches. And we learned that wasn't something that they really encourage. We want her to try to walk, because we don't want her losing muscle. We don't want her, right? So, but it's one of those invisible diseases, because one day she could be literally running, and no pain. And then the next day she couldn't walk on it. And that's something that was in itself really hard for her, I think, with her friends, because they'd be like, well, what's wrong? And she'd say, I have this condition. And she got really good at advocating for herself. But she'd say, I have this bone condition where my immune system attacks the bone, and some days it hurts and sometimes it doesn't. And me having to explain this to her teachers and her PE teacher, and to be like, so basically, If she does not feel like doing something, she has to be allowed to not do it. But if she feels like she could do it, even if she has pain, let her do it. So that was their instructions. And that
I have to imagine that's a little bit scary as a teacher to not know a lot about this disease and be like, oh, I don't want to hurt this child, right? But I'm also like, as you're talking, Mayna, and I think Mata, you can touch on this a little bit as well. What's really striking me and might be hitting people who are listening as well is, I mean, obviously there's the challenges with the condition itself, but as a parent of this, I mean, you listed off, I saw you count them off on your hand, like at least 5 medical professionals. You thought maybe you were missing a few.
definitely.
That you as a parent and your husband are trying to get this child to all of these appointments while also managing another child. In your case, I know, Mata, you just have Mateo, but like trying to manage working, getting children where they need to go, making sure your son is also getting the attention that he needs. Talk to us just for a moment. Maybe, Mata, you want to go first on this one, but like, what is it like to, as a parent, to be managing that? I mean, the only word that's coming to my mind, and Mata, you and I have worked together for a long time, but is overwhelm. Does that resonate with the both of you?
Yeah, I think parenting by itself is just hard and overwhelming, but parenting a kid with special needs is a whole new other world that unless you have a special needs kid, there's no way you can understand. And just as you were talking, Mayna, I was remembering, oh yes, Mateo goes to this doctor. Oh yes, I have done this. So I even have like a document that at some point we were going to so many doctors that I had to create this whole document that I have like his medical history and all surgeries and appointments and follow-up and all the information of the doctors. And I think, like you were saying, that you were maybe avoiding at first looking through much. I did the total opposite. I was like, he has this syndrome. Okay, let me find everything that I can. And then I crash and burn because I was so overwhelmed with all the information. And because it is a rare disease, there's not a lot of information what could happen like in the future, or all these possibilities that they can go blind, or something like that. And I remember within 2 months of finding out about his syndrome, I found the foundation. They were doing a regional gathering in different states. They did one here in Dallas. I signed up for it. I helped because I wanted to meet people and all of that. And I remember once I got there, I was expecting parents, obviously, with kids with BBS there, but I wasn't expecting seeing kids with BBS. So having what the future could be, a picture in your face, that I got like really anxious. And all kids were in college. Some had jobs, even though they were legally blind. They live alone, so it was good, but still having the picture of what it could be, it just it was hard. And I don't think people talk about how grief can appear in parenthood. And we definitely, or at least me, I know, I don't want to speak for my husband, but I know I have gone through a lot of grief in motherhood, because you have this, everybody has their own image of, when I have a son, when I have a daughter, I'm going to do this, they're going to do that. And when you have a kid with special need, is everything a question mark? And you have to go, like you said, day by day. And just, I'm always, before having Mateo, I always have been like very organized, and I have to know what I'm doing and schedule. Everything right now is just goes out the window, because you don't know what's going to happen today or tomorrow. If he has a symptom about something, you're already thinking, okay, now I have to see this doctor. Maybe he can be this, maybe just a common cold. And it can be really lonely. And I remember when we got the diagnosis about the him being on the spectrum, my first reaction was rage, but it wasn't for Mateo. It was because I remember when he was having like meltdowns and stuff, people would say, oh, he's just being spoiled. Oh, it's just because you're first-time parents. He's only, that's common because he has 3 years old or 2 years old. And when the doctor said he's on the spectrum, I was like, I knew it. There's something else going on. And I felt rage because I'm like, I'm not crazy. And yeah, it's in parenting also, it can affect your relationship with your significant other. It can impact your friendships, even relationship with family members. Trying to balance work. I right now have a part-time job and I'm barely trying to keep everything together. And my son takes therapies here at home. So that's another thing. So it's just, it can be really lonely, and you just have to build your village. And the village could be one doctor that understands your son. It could be the only friend that you can talk to. It could be, maybe a family member, stuff like that. But it's not it's not like people put it as everybody's going to understand and be helpful, because it's not like that.
Yeah. There's a few words I was writing, like jotting down little notes as you were talking, Mara, and I also was noticing, like, when Mayna was nodding as you were talking, because there were some words that really seemed to strike a chord with both Mayna and with me, frankly. And I think the first big one was grief, and sort of this recognition that, when we decide to have a child, or when we find out that we're having a child, whether that was an intentional decision or not, for many of us, there's this image of what that's going to look like, who our child is going to be. And I can only, and my oldest daughter has ADHD, which is nowhere, I mean, it certainly affects her ability to manage things, as Mayna, you said that that's something you've been diagnosed with. But I do not want to equate my journey as the parent of a kiddo with ADHD, which, doesn't have the same sort of physical repercussions, obviously, that something like CRMO or BBS has, and that doesn't require the, plethora of medical professionals to manage that both of you have. But we all have this image of who our child's going to be. And when they aren't that, it's difficult. But the grief that I think you mentioned is such a valid emotion, and one that I think we don't talk about it a lot in parenting. As a side note, I recall, and both of you, we'll talk about this in a moment, both of you have been in the Heartful Parent Academy, and we had grief coach Wendy Sloniker come and do a session a year and a half ago now about grief and parenting.
I saw it.
Yeah, I remember that you attended that one. Such an under talked about emotion when it comes to parenting. And I have to imagine it's really prominent in the space that you both are inhabiting. The other words that really caught my attention: loneliness, like that can feel like a really solitary journey, rage, and not rage at your son or even at the diagnosis itself, but rage at the responses that other people have. And then I saw you both, Mayna, you really kind of nodded your head when Mara mentioned that this can really take a toll on your relationship with your parenting partner.
Yeah.
Mayna, am I projecting or
No.
wrong when I say that those words also resonated for you?
Totally. And Mara, when you were, what was it? You were talking about the loneliness and how it feels. And I feel like, and the grief, but I think when you're in it, like as a parent anyway, you're constantly thinking, okay, what do I, like, how do I manage this? How do I juggle the routine and the food and what we're going to eat and how we're going to like organize that? Like, and me having ADHD, I will hyper focus on things and burn out quickly. Right. But there's a lot of gifts in there that I realized that as an advocate for my kids, that I can really focus on things. And if I'm interested in something, I could really get into it. Right. So I'm understanding this all at the same time, but I know that looking back, I've been in a state of survival mode for so long that when I do see something, or from, like, I was looking at my journal the other day about her procedure, and I was looking at it, I was like, wait, this is not the procedure. I was like, oh yeah, she had an endoscopy in the spring that I forgot about. And then I started bawling, just like weeping, because I have not had a chance to process everything yet. And as I speak, I still have not had a chance to process it all because we don't have time to do that. There's always something that needs our attention with our child, or with the treatment, or with the schedule, or with insurance companies, or with our budget, or like it's just relentless. And this is funny because, people are always like, what's one thing you wish people would tell you before you became a parent? And I would always say, I wish they told you that it's relentless, right? like that, the sleep and this, and it's the joy too, right? Mm-hmm. But this kind of relentlessness doesn't allow space for rejuvenation, and unless we make it. And I guess that is what I want to say, if it would help anybody out there, is when you build your village, and when you realize, like, there is no doing this without help. And so you are going to ask for help in ways you've never done before. So when you do, be specific about the time you need with your spouse or with your partner about getting that, because that is the last thing on your list that you're thinking of. Right. But it is still really important. And I would say the grief thing, that it could feel so strange to experience joy when you're in the middle of all of this, but figuring out ways to do that, even if it's joking around in a really serious moment. And my husband's really good at that. And thank goodness that was there sometimes with what we're going through. But I think that was part of it. And getting the help you need, right? It's like the whole oxygen mask thing. We're tired, right? Kids still wake parents up throughout their journey. But when they're sick, and then, like, even Ethan, he had sleeping problems, and figuring out who's gonna take this round, or even, like, my partner is making money so that we can do the things we need to do, and I'm handling the schedule. And then we don't really get a lot of time to talk about what that's like for each other. And because we're only really reporting on what needs to happen next. And like I said, it just feels like there's not a lot of space for other things. But the community that I found later on with with the foundation, the CRMO Warriors Foundation, I went to an event similar to what you were saying, Mara, where I saw other kids with CRMO, and I saw how Cora told me when she came home, she was like, Mom, that really helped being around other kids that knew what I was going through, and that knew that we didn't have to talk about CRMO. We just had to play together. And I just knew that they knew what I went through. And because I asked her, I said, what did you guys talk about? And she said, we talked a little bit about what medication we're on or what we're doing, but most of the time they just hung out, which is different than hanging out with her friends from school, because then she feels pressure to talk about it, or to explain it, or to teach people about it. She doesn't want to talk about it, right? There's so much weird stuff going on. And that was very helpful for her to be around other peers that knew what she was going through, and helpful for me as a parent to talk to other parents that were going through it. And, they really helped tell me how they got through the whole eating situation and the when to push, when to pull, right, kind of thing.
Yeah. I think also the part of the loneliness is, like, for example, the both of us have always been very private, but now with things regarding Mateo, we're even more private because we like to make decisions of what we think is best for him without any opinions. And I think in the beginning, until maybe last year, I was with this thing that I have to educate everyone on what Mateo has and trying to get them to understand. And here's this article and here's that. And at some point, with some people, I knew no matter what I did, they were always going to have this opinions or stuff. So I just had to let it go and concentrate on us three and what's best for him. So we try to block out as much of the outside noise. We do ask for advice for some people, but at the end of the day, it's just the two of us making the decision. And you're gonna mess up. You're gonna make mistakes. We joke, we're just gonna have a special account for him so he can go to a psychologist when he's older. Probably gonna mess something up, but at least you're doing it. And this is something that I remember one of my sister-in-law told my husband one day, and it has stuck with me once I heard it. And sometimes I use it as a reminder for myself, like a mantra. You are the expert on your kid. No matter if you have one kid, 2, 4, whatever, you know what's best for them, and your gut will tell you. Right now, we're in the middle of reevaluating some of the stuff, the services that Mateo is receiving. And it's because we both feel like something maybe we have to change course here. But yeah, you are the expert on your kid, no matter what people tell you. So if you think something is going on, find out, and there's always somebody that's gonna help you along the way.
I love that phrase that you are the expert on your child. And it's funny because it's actually something when I meet with potential coaching clients and I have a document that I send out to them. And it says that in that document that I'm here to be a support and a guide, but you know your child, and what might work for my child may not work for your child, or what feels, right to me may not feel right to you. It's such an important piece. And I was struck, Mata, as you were talking, by that gut instinct. Something's not right, and Mayna, you saying your daughter kept complaining about the pain in her ankle, and just knowing this isn't just a growing pain. There is something else going on here. We need to get some answers. And you both, sounds like you've just both advocated for your children so incredibly beautifully, which, I hope that that's something that you both feel like you can take as I did that well in the midst of all the relentless nature of the appointments. We're limited on time, unfortunately, because you both have such fascinating stories, and there's so much here to explore. And I know that you both also have so much wisdom, some of which you've already shared, for parents who are already on this journey or may find themselves on a similar journey with a kiddo who has special needs. But you've both talked about the importance of community and finding somebody who can support you in that. And I just want to ask, because you've both been part of the Heartful Parent Academy for years, do you mind sharing just a little bit for people who don't really know much about what that, group is, how that has been supportive to you on your journey?
For me, for example, like the masterclass that you were mentioning about grief, that was something that it was very helpful, because I think is pretty common for people. And I think they do it, they mean well, but there's a lot of like dismissive. It's okay, it's going to be okay, just get up, move on. But it's like, but what am I going to do with everything that all of this that I'm feeling? And if I know for me, if I bottle up stuff, it's not helpful for my mental health. So it has helped me with that. I remember another master class that is on the academy about teaching about sexual safety awareness, especially with a kid with special needs that has speech delay. Mateo has improved a lot. Like, he doesn't do the head banging anymore. He's improved a lot in a lot of ways with speech, but it does still worries me that if something happens, he won't be able to tell me, either because he doesn't know the language yet, or because of the people can take advantage more easily if a kid has special needs. So it has been very helpful. It talks about self-care. So it's not only just related to kids, but it's for yourself, is regarding parenting, relationships. So it has helped us in a lot of different aspects of our life.
I would add the newsletters or just the emails that inform Christy, like what you come across in your voice is really grounding. And I found that so helpful, because even if I wasn't on one of the calls or a meeting or a webinar, I knew I could access it. And there were a bunch of times where being part of the membership was so great, especially for me with ADHD, is like I go in and then come out, right? That's how I learn or how I work. And I'm thinking of things all the time, but I know that I could go and look at a past masterclass and watch the movie and then jump in when I can. And one of the Vox calls it was like just a call where you were saying, anybody come to this call with any issues with kiddos in this age range. And that was just so nice that I felt like I didn't have to come with a certain question. I could just show up and I could learn from all the other parents that were there and telling their stories. And then something always did come up that I was struggling with, and I got support from you and the other parents. And it's just so, and you just have such a great way of finding great speakers. Like, I think that's another thing too, that I saw Rosetta Lee and from one of your master classes, and it's just so helpful. And it's outside of just what we're going through, right? Like, we might have kids with some special needs or illness that we're dealing with, but we still have to parent. And like, I still have to teach them manners at the table, even, right? Like, I still have to figure out how to divide the labor with my husband and have family meetings and integrate what we've learned through the journey of this illness into our parenting structure. And those were like the family meeting one, like we still use that, and it has morphed and changed and will go in and out. But that was one of the most valuable things for our family. So thank you very much. I really, it's just so wonderful to have you.
Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, it's obviously, for me, it's been such a pleasure to work with both of you and in the academy and beyond, and, you know, to have you as a part of that. It's obviously gratifying to hear that that's been a support. I am, you know, I think part of the reason that you both found that helpful or find it helpful is because when people see that you are the parents that are in there, we have a lovely community of parents that are there to support and share their own stories in the way that you both have done so selflessly today. And I know, Mata, you said that you and your husband have generally been very private people. And so I know that this was no small ask of me to ask you both to share your journeys. And I know there was, you know, some nervousness and hesitation about doing that. And I'm so so incredibly grateful to you for bringing awareness to CRMO and BBS and autism. I just want to, note for everybody, I'm actually going to issue a challenge here to everyone who's listening. You will find in the show notes lots of information or places to access information about these conditions. And you may say, well, I'm confident my child doesn't have that, right? Fine. But somebody in your circle might. And if you would do Mada and Mayna the great favor of just grabbing some of those links and going to your social media, if you're on social media, and saying, hey, I just learned about these syndromes, really interesting stuff, or these conditions, share the word and share the word about rare diseases so that we can get more research done, more awareness done, and more support. I mean, you've all heard me say, I don't think there's enough support for parents out there as it is, but to hear the both of you describe sort of the relentless nature of caring for kiddos who need extra, we need to sort of spread the word about what that looks like, feels like, and how we can support parents who are walking a similar journey. So, like I said, I know we could talk for so much longer, but in the interest of time, we have to wrap it up. So I just want to say thank you to both of you for everything that you have gifted the Heartful Parent Podcast audience today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. This is great.
All right, everyone. I hope that conversation, which I know is longer than many of our episodes, was enlightening, informative, helpful to you. And I just want to reiterate my gratitude to both Mayna and Mada for opening up their personal private lives and, sort of the medical records, if you will, of their children as a way to bring awareness to the conditions of CRMO and BBS and autism, as well as to their journeys as parents of kiddos who have special needs and rare conditions. I think I'd like to reiterate my challenge that I issued during our conversation, which is, if you are a parent who, whether you have a kiddo who has a rare condition or not, or is on the spectrum or is not, if you are parenting and you did not previously know about CRMO and BBS, please go to the show notes, grab a link for each of those and share them on your social media and just say, hey, want to spread awareness. Because without more people becoming aware, it may take longer for some families to get the diagnosis that they're looking for. Mayna said to me after we finished recording that if it hadn't been for that nurse friend of hers who had heard of CRMO and the doctors in the ER who happened to have heard of it, they may have been on a much longer journey than they were to get that diagnosis, because so many doctors that she has encountered have not been aware of the diagnosis. And BBS is even more rare. As Mada explained, her child had a surgery for his extra toes and was in full body casts, which may have been necessary anyways, but the doctor who did that surgery wasn't aware that might be a condition or a symptom of a bigger condition. So I would invite you to help me here at the Heartful Parent Podcast spread the word about CRMO and about BBS. And then I would just note, I am so grateful for the kind things that both Mada and Mayna had to say about the Heartful Parent Academy. And if you feel like as a parent, wherever you are on your journey, you could use some extra support, please, please, please join us. If you go to my website at theheartfulparent.com, click on the Academy, click join and use code podcast. You will get your first month for only $7. All right, everyone. Parenting is a difficult journey. Some, have a little extra that they are managing. So as we really dive into 2024, let's all make empathy and understanding a part of our approach to the world. I think we could all use it a little bit, don't you? Take care. I'll see you next week.